Many times you go to a website and you see a form like this, maybe a sign up form, maybe a login form with multiple fields, text fields, maybe drop down menus, maybe radio boxes or check boxes. These are created with the form elements in HTML. So if you actually go to the Mozilla Firefox website where you have these documentation, you will actually see a section called forms in the HTML elements reference. So if I click on forms, these are the multiple elements that help you create forms like this. And they have a very awesome guide over here as well on that. So let's take a look and create our forms. So I have this simple little HTML over here, and let's get started. So over here, I'm going to simply, when you want to create a form, the first thing you start off with is you create a container called the form element. So you say form, and that's it. So basically, this is a container with a property called action. We're going to get to that in a minute, but let's take a look. I save, refresh, and nothing happens because this element is simply a containing element, container element, and it contains children, which are going to be the different fields that we have. Now, the most common one there is called the input element, which has multiple types. So if I just do input and hit enter, VS Code automatically creates the input element with the type text. So I save, refresh, and you see this input element with this text field got created. I can enter information in here. All right, so that's pretty good. I'm going to refresh. Now, another thing that you do with your fields is that you have some kind of label saying that, oh, this is a first name field or a password field or a username field. So you create these labels. So I'm going to simply create a label over here with a label element, and I'm going to put in some information over here. So let's say this is the username field. So I'm going to say username colon, save, and refresh. And you see this username shows up. This is the label for this particular input field. Now, interestingly, when I created this element, it added this attribute for over here, right? For is equal to nothing because I didn't enter anything. So basically, this for element basically says that, okay, you provide the name, or sorry, the ID of the input field that this label is for. So this username label is for this text field, right? So it basically is asking for what is the ID for this particular text field. So I'm going to say, okay, the ID just for reference this is the username one, right? So I'm just going to say username or user, doesn't matter what I call it, but user or username is a good word for that or good ID for that. So the ID for this particular element is user, and over here I'm going to provide that. So I'm going to say, okay, this particular label is for this element. All right, that's it. Save, refresh, and when I make this connection, another special thing happens. When I actually click over here on the label, it actually activates this particular field. So if I click, you see this got activated. So if I unselect this and I click, this got activated. And that's the magic that happens for when you connect this particular label with the input field. So that's just the start, right? Let's move on and learn a little bit more. Another thing that I want to tell you is that you always want to submit the form or send the form or send the information, right? So you do that by creating another input element, but this time the type is going to be submit. Save, refresh, and you see the submit button shows up. Now let's say if you say, hey, I don't want to provide this submit over here. I want to just call it, let's say, save or something like that, or login or something. So you can simply come in over here and say value, and I can say value should be, let's say, save. Save, refresh, and you see it says save over here. Okay, so now over here, let's say a lot of times this text value should be already pre-written, right? So let's say if you want to enter certain information which should be already there. So the value attribute is also available in the input field with the type text over here. So I can say value should be please enter info, all right? Or some other thing. So let's say the username is Aziz. I can simply put in Aziz Ali. Save, refresh, and you see this particular field is pre-written with that particular value that I've entered over here. Now, one more thing this particular thing, this input element has is something called a placeholder. So if I come in over here and call placeholder and provide some information, please enter info here, save, refresh, and nothing happens. But let's see if nothing is entered over here, right? If I remove this, you see, I'm going to make this big. You see that please enter info here is the placeholder text, meaning the background text that appears when you have nothing entered. So let's say if I start entering some information, you see the placeholder text disappears. So those are some very handy fields that you will use when you're creating forms. Now, if you want multiple fields, you simply, actually, let's say I put a BR tag over here, and let's say if I move the submit over here and I have maybe a few of them. So if I want to create another label and for password, let's say, so label, and I'm going to call it password over here as well, and an input field over here as well. And this time, the type is going to be password. So let's see what happens when I do that. So password, and the ID for this particular element is going to be also password, just so we can make that connection. This can be any word. We can call it anything. All right. Save, refresh, and you see password field has been created. And now if I enter information over here, you see that since the type of this particular field is password, this information gets blocked from the view of the user. All right. So those are certain things that I want to explain to you to get started. Now there's one more important information that I want to share with you. Now, let's say you save this information, right? You see when I save, this became short in size because the zoom went out. But also you may notice a very minor detail. You see this question mark appeared over here. I didn't enter it. So if I remove this, enter, and if I hit save, you see this question mark gets appeared over here. Now what's happening over here is that you cannot make these forms functional, meaning when you want to save this information or make the login feature, that is not possible with just HTML and CSS alone. You actually need a web application backend or a backend system to actually talk to a database, a software, which is going to receive this username, password information and actually validate if that's correct or not. So since this course is about HTML and CSS only, HTML is only for the layout of your website, and CSS enhances that with colors and layouts. HTML and CSS alone does not make fully functional websites. They only do the visual aspect of it, right? So this form information is incomplete without learning the backend stuff, okay? Because these forms actually connect with a backend system. And if you want to learn more about it, you can connect with iLoveCoding Pro and get those courses on how to become a real full-fledged web developer who can actually create these functional forms, because that's out of the scope of HTML and CSS altogether actually. All right. So now just to let you know one more piece of information so you see the full picture. So let's say when this particular form is submitted, right, it needs to send this information to the backend. The backend is hosted on a URL. So let's say you have a website and your location for that backend is, let's say, HTTP. I'm going to just call it your website .com/ or website blah blah.com/form. All right, form submission. All right, so I'm just gonna make this weird URL. All right, that's it. So let's say when this information needs to be sent, when this button is clicked, it will send all this information to this URL. Okay, so I'm gonna save, and now let's see what happens. So I put in Aziz Ali over here. I'm gonna say blah 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 my password. Now if I hit save over here, right, what happened? I need to refresh my page first. Sorry. So say blah blah blah, save. You see this URL. The web page actually went to this particular URL where the information needed to be sent. So that's what happens in the real world when you're on facebook.com or youtube.com or whatever. When you actually hit send or save, when you submit the form, the information is actually being sent to the backend system where they actually validate it, or whatever activity needs to happen on the backend happens. Maybe if you're logging in, it actually validates if the username and password are correct. If you are signing up, it actually saves the information in the database and so forth. Now, one last piece that I want to share with you is whenever you create your input fields, you actually want to provide a name property on it as well. So let's say if I call this particular one, name is username, and the password field should be called password. So name is equal to password. Save. Now I want to share with you one more thing. So save, refresh. Now I'm going to enter some information. So blah, blah, blah this time. And now if I hit save this time, you will notice that the URL is the same over here, but after the question mark, username is equal to Aziz Ali and password is equal to blah, blah, blah is entered and sent to that particular location. So that's just minor details that I want to share with you, which becomes very important when you become a real developer and do these backend systems. But that is out of the scope of this course because HTML and CSS does not do that magic at all. JavaScript does and other backend languages does. So that's pretty much it for this video. You learned how to create forms. I will talk to you in the next video where we're going to learn more about creating different kinds of form fields. All right, talk to you in the next video.